to another tutorial with the Essentials Club. If you are new around here, I am Maddie and welcome. This is the shirt that I'll be taking you through the steps of how to make. I've actually already sat down and filmed the steps, and silly old me decided to accidentally delete it off my camera before I put it on my computer ready to edit it. So here I am filming it for a second time, so that's fun. Sorry if you have been one of those people that have been waiting for months for me to refilm it, as I've just been constantly posting pictures of me in this shirt, and I've just kind of been putting off refilming it because it's a bit heartbreaking knowing that you've already done it, but here we go again. As you can see, it is such like a beautiful dainty blouse style top with some shirring at the end of the sleeves, shirring at the waistline, a high neck with a tie back, and this nice loose fit style. I made this one originally out of a tablecloth from my grandma, and it just gives it a more special meaning to me because she did pass away this year, and now every time I wear this I get to think about her and feel like a big warm hug from her. So that's another beautiful thing about being able to make your own clothes, is utilizing fabrics or pieces that have been handed down to you from family members. And also today, the fabric that I'm going to be using to make this garment is another tablecloth. If you're also going to follow along this tutorial, this is what you'll need to make your own beautiful blouse. We'll need some lightweight material. Like I just mentioned, I used tablecloth for this. I believe it's like a linen cotton blend. This one's quite a bit see-through with the embroidery and little lace details, whereas this one is a bit more straightforward linen. Anything that is like nice and flowy and lightweight would be perfect for this. I wouldn't suggest anything too thick. It just might not work as well with the shirring and with the fit when we finish it. I'll put the suggested measurements you'll need for sizing in the description of the video below. You'll also need a shirt to reference, as we're going to create a template tracing around that. I love using pieces that we already have in our wardrobe as a reference piece to then build on top of, because we obviously know that this fits. I've just got my Essentials shirt in a size medium, as I know that's not too tight of a fit, so likewise try and find something that isn't too tight but also not too loose. If you can't find that perfect fit, we can also play around with adding extra seam allowance and stuff like that to get it to a fit that is more like this. We'll also need our measuring tape, some pins, some shirring elastic thread and the matching bobbin to go with that. We'll then need some regular thread to match our material, as well as a bobbin to go with that. You'll also need a paintbrush, some fabric chalk, our fabric scissors, and then we'll need our trusty old sewing machine. So let's jump into the steps of making our own beautiful blouse. Because I'm working with a smaller tablecloth, I need to work my measurements within the confines of that, but obviously if you have a fresh bit of fabric, your sizing is totally up to your body shape and how you want this to fit. So just keep that in mind, that we might have a little bit of difference in how long ours end up. So lay down your bit of fabric and then put your reference shirt on top of that. Again, because I have this tablecloth, I'm just going to shift it around until I find a spot where it makes sense with the pattern and the embroidery of the fabric, and also making sure that I have enough space to create the sleeves later as well. We'll then tuck the sleeves in, so all we're looking at is like this main chest area and the armholes. So we'll make sure to have at least 1/2 inch to 1 inch seam allowance, again depending on the fit of the shirt that you're referencing and how you want this final shirt to turn out. I ended up just using about 1/2 inch seam allowance, as that will be plenty enough to get it to the fit that I want. As you can see, the bottom of this tablecloth has a beautiful embroidered section, so I'm going to use that as a feature piece, and I've lined the bottom of my shirt with the bottom of that. Like this one had some beautiful lace pieces and embroidery, so I made sure to center them when I was laying the shirt on top. And then we'll just trace around that edge, around the armhole, over this top shoulder section, and when we get to the neck, I just stuck to the higher point of the neckline of the shirt, as we will be making this a higher neck style. If you don't want yours to be as high neck, that's totally fine. You can just follow that lower line and remember to add 1/2 inch seam allowance. Remove the shirt and then fold it in half and cut on the fold. That way it is nice and symmetrical. And then I used that front piece that I've now cut out as a template for the back piece. Once again, I have cut it on the fold, but I have just shifted that center section off the edge by 1/2 inch. And the reason we're doing that is we'll end up cutting it in half down there, and that will act as seam allowance to allow us to join it and not lose any of the width. So we should now be up to the same point where we have 2 halves for the back and 1 main piece for the front. We're going to start assembling this. We'll focus on the back side first. So lay one of the pieces with the good sides facing up, grab the other piece and lay that with the good sides facing down. And then we're just going to focus on that straight center seam at the back. So obviously that is the armhole over this side and that is the center seam there. And we're going to sew from the bottom up and stop about 4 to 5 inches from that top section. This is just going to be the section that opens up and allows our head to come through the top. So you can have it as a feature piece and even have it like 10 inches low, and then it's kind of like a big open hole, or you could even have it say 2 or 3 inches if you only want it to be a little bit of a hole. So I'm going to do the 4 inches, start sewing from the bottom up to the top and pop a pin in place to remind me to stop there. Then once I've sewn that, we're going to start joining these back sides onto the front. We'll lay the front piece with the good sides facing up, and now our back pieces are joined and we will lay them good sides facing down. And the bits that we'll be focusing on sewing to join this all together are these 2 side seams and that shoulder straight edge. So we don't sew the armholes or the neck hole. Might be a good time just to try it on, just to make sure that the neckline and the shoulder edges are sitting where we want it to, and if they're not, make any adjustments if need be. You obviously don't want the shoulders to come out too far and you don't want the neck to come up too high, as we will be adding on a collared section as well. Once you've joined the front and the back panels at the side and back seams, just go back to the top of that back seam section where there is now a split, and we'll just create a double folded hem there, pin it in place, and then sew 1 rectangle line that goes down one side across the seam and then back up the other side, and that will secure that and keep it nice and clean. We are then up to the next step, which is adding on this collared section. We'll grab our measuring tape and measure the circumference of that neck area. Once you've found that amount, we then need to figure out how long we want this tie-up piece for the collar to be. For me, I want mine to be quite exaggerated, so I'm going to add about 20 inches, and that means there's enough for seam allowance and extra length at the end that I can create a nice big bow feature tie at the back. So that's the neck circumference of the top plus however much you want added to create that tie section. And then to figure out the height, we just need to determine how high we want this end point to be. I want mine to be about 1 inch, if not a little bit under, and then double that and then add 1 inch seam allowance. So whatever your final height you want it to be, double that and then add 1 inch seam allowance. So now that I've got my cutting width and my cutting length, I'm just going to grab my extra material, plot out those measurements to then create a rectangle, trim that. I'll then fold it so the good sides are facing. Obviously, if you have material that has a pattern on it or has a clear good and bad side, make sure you fold that so they're facing. Pin that in place, and then once we have that ready to go, we're going to sew down one of these short sides all the way down until almost the center point, and then stop there, and then we'll grab the other side and do that again, go down the short side and go down this long edge and leave about 4 to 6 inches open there, and that's the point that we're now going to push this out. So on the end that we have sewn closed, we'll focus on that for now, and we'll grab this clean paintbrush and pop it on that closed edge and begin to shimmy it so it kind of separates and allows us to push that closed edge through. Sometimes this might take a little bit to get going, and then we'll push it out through that little open in the center that we left. So that's one side done. We'll repeat it on the other side, and then we'll be up to joining this collar onto the top. Find the center point of the collar section, and then find the center point of the front neckline, and match these points by laying them good sides facing, and have the raw edge of the neckline and the seam edge of the collar matching, and then just go around and pin from that center point to the back section. Once that's all secure in place, then just sew one line from the back edge all the way around and back to the other edge. Now it's time to add the sleeves onto this. First we need to cut out 2 panels for these sleeve sections. So to figure out those measurements, grab your measuring tape and start up at your shoulder and figure out how long you want it to be. For me, again, I'm kind of limited to what I have left here, but I have been able to add a few extra patches to get it down kind of to my wrist area. So once you've found your measurement, then we'll add 2 inches for seam allowance. Then to figure out the width of these sleeve penners, we'll just grab our measuring tape once again and measure this circumference of the armhole. So it might be good to start maybe down at the bottom and then just continue pulling it around until you find that measurement. For me that was 20 inches, so I've added 2 inches for seam allowance as well. So now that we have the length and the width, we'll plot out those points on the bit of material and cut out 2 rectangles for that. So you should have one big panel like this for your sleeve. We're going to fold it widthways and figure out which end you want to be the one that attaches to the sleeve. We'll then focus on that. We'll pick up this top panel and then lay this armhole section over the sleeve. Ideally align this top section so that meets. You can even pin it in place if you don't want it to move around. We'll then just trace this armhole and go about another inch beyond the point where it stops at that underarm, and that will just give us a bit of extra seam allowance to then join underneath there. Use your fabric chalk to replicate that curve, trim it to that shape, and then repeat it for the other side. Once we've got that curved edge of the armhole onto our sleeve, we'll lay it flat so that the good sides are facing up. We'll then grab our top, which should be all good sides facing outwards. Now obviously the curves, once we have them folded like this, are going in opposite directions. Keep in mind that that might involve a bit of shuffling around of the fabric to make it match, but essentially we'll just begin to pin there with the good sides facing and just continue to match it all the way around until this sleeve then covers that armhole section of the top. Once you've got that all pinned and matching, we'll then just jump over to the machine. Again, start at the underarm section, sew one line all the way around till we get back to where we started. Once you finish sewing the armhole, you can flip it out and just double check that it's looking okay. We'll then need to flip it back so the good sides are facing, and we pretty much end up stuffing the whole shirt into this sleeve section, so that just ends up looking like one big puffy sleeve. And we're just going to start sewing the good sides facing of this sleeve. Start at the very bottom of the underarm and the armpit section, and then sew one line all the way back down to the wrist. And then once you've done that, you can flip it all so the good sides reveal, and you'll have one complete sleeve. Now that I have added both sleeves, my top is pretty much done. I am obsessed with how this has come out, with the details of the embroidery down the arm and the waist area, and then also all the edges have this beautiful finishing. So I'm actually just going to leave that as is. I'm really happy with that style and I want it to be a little bit different to this. So I'll show you how that looks on in case that's the style that you want to go. But if you're more drawn to this style where there's the shirring waist and the shirring wrist, I will continue to talk you through the steps of that. So you've got 2 options of how you can finish this baby. Obviously if you stopped at this point on this one, you would also have to hem the edges. With my one, I've got that finishing on the edge, so I'm just going to leave it as is. And then if you want to continue on and add the shirring, we then need to grab our shirring thread and thread it onto a bobbin. When we do this, we need to make sure that we do not stretch it at all, as the thing about shirring is it needs to stretch as it's stitched, so then it needs to be on the bobbin and not stretched at all. So we'll hand thread it on there the whole way around. I know that can be a bit time consuming and annoying, but that's just what we have to do. So put your shirring thread onto the bobbin and fill it until it's pretty much to the brim, and then insert that as normal in the bobbin section. You might want to do some testing with your shirring to make sure that you've got it in the right setting, so play around with the tension and also the length of the stitches, as those are 2 variables that help the shirring bunch up more. I tend to put mine on a tighter tension and a larger length of stitch. Once you've experimented with it a bit, we're all good to start sewing. So for these wrists, I would probably measure in about 2 or 3 inches from that edge and start a line there. Simply just sew it as normal, except have your good sides facing out, so then the shirring thread is hidden underneath. Start ideally at that seam, sew the whole way around that circumference. Instead of chopping your elastic each time and then restarting it, I tend to just lift the foot and then move it over to start sewing the next line. For this one, I added 5 lines about ½ an inch apart. Again, it comes down to personal preference, how much you want to add and what effect you like. You might like it even further up the arm, you might like it taking up more. Totally up to you. You can even mark out the placements of the lines and then just sew that as normal. And then to do the waist area, you do exactly the same, where you make sure the good sides are facing out. Start at one seam, figure out how much you want to start off the edge, so that will create a cute little ruffle section like that. Begin sewing your line all the way around and figure out how many you want to add and the spacing for that. And then you should have your nice elastic waist and your elastic wrist area, and all you'll need to do is hem the bottom edges and you'll have a beautiful blouse. I'm so excited that I have 2 of these now. I can play around with the different styling. I feel like this has a bit like of a, I don't know, cowgirl-esque vibe, and I can wear that with my jeans, and then this one's very like boho. So if you did follow along this tutorial, I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to like it and subscribe, as that really helps my channel, and share it with anyone else you think would be interested as well. I've got a heap of tutorials in the works, so I can't wait to see you guys in the upcoming ones that I share. Time to have a play in this baby and add it to the wardrobe. you.